poor veteran bought abandoned hotel for 49 cents. What he found inside shocked everyone. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into this amazing story. It was a cold morning in the small town of Pine Ridge, and Jake Mitchell, a retired Army veteran, found himself walking down the dusty road toward an old, run-down building. He had nothing left after his years of service, no family, no savings, and no real prospects. The weight of his past hung heavy on him, but one thing kept him going: his determination to survive. Jake had always dreamed of owning a home, even a modest one, and now, by some strange twist of fate, he had found an opportunity. The old Pine Ridge Hotel, a building that had been abandoned for decades, was up for sale. The price? 49 cents. Most people would have laughed at such an offer, but not Jake. He had seen worse things in his life, and he knew that sometimes the greatest opportunities come in the most unexpected packages. Jake didn't have much money, but he managed to scrape together the few coins he had and made the purchase. When he walked through the doors of the old hotel, he was hit with the smell of musty wood and the echo of silence. The air was thick with dust, and the floor creaked under his boots. Yet, despite its decrepit appearance, there was something about the place that felt different. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he felt a pull, a sense that there was more to this building than met the eye. As Jake began to explore the hotel, he noticed something strange: a hidden door in the back of the main hall, one that was cleverly disguised behind a row of old bookshelves. Curiosity got the better of him, and he gently pulled the shelves aside. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit room that seemed completely out of place in the decaying building. The room was filled with old furniture, dusty paintings, and something far more intriguing: a collection of old boxes and crates, piled high in the corner. As Jake sifted through the boxes, his heart began to race. What he discovered inside would change his life forever. There, buried beneath a pile of forgotten items, was a small chest. It looked old, its brass lock tarnished with age, but something about it called to him. He carefully opened the chest, not knowing what to expect. Inside, to his astonishment, was a bundle of papers, old photographs, and a stack of cash, far more money than Jake had ever seen in his life. But that wasn't the most surprising part. What really shocked him was what was hidden beneath the money: a set of blueprints for a massive underground vault, one that seemed to stretch beneath the hotel and go deep into the earth. The blueprints were marked with strange symbols, and the more Jake studied them, the more he realized that this wasn't just a regular hotel. It was a key to something far bigger, something buried long ago. He had unknowingly stumbled upon a treasure trove, a hidden legacy that had been waiting for the right person to uncover it. Jake knew that this discovery was no coincidence. Somehow, this abandoned hotel, purchased for a mere 49 cents, was the gateway to a mystery that would change everything. And he was just getting started. Jake stared at the blueprints in disbelief. The room around him, once just a dusty relic, now felt like the threshold of something much bigger, something that could change his life forever. As he sifted through the chest, his heart raced. The more he examined the blueprints, the more he realized how much they detailed a complex, underground vault that stretched beneath the entire hotel. The patterns on the paper were unlike anything he had ever seen. They didn't seem to fit with the building's structure, and that's when the realization hit him. This place had been designed with a purpose far beyond just being a hotel. It was a hidden treasure trove, one waiting for the right person to unlock its secrets. For a moment, Jake could hardly believe what he was holding. It wasn't just the old photographs or the money inside the chest that was astonishing. It was the promise of what lay beneath, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. And Jake, with his quiet determination and his newfound home, felt as if fate had led him to this moment. Jake had always believed in second chances, but this was beyond anything he had ever hoped for. After a few moments of stunned silence, he carefully folded the blueprints and tucked them into his jacket. He needed to think, to process everything. But first, he had to explore further. He turned back to the rest of the room, hoping to find some clue as to who had hidden this vault and why. As he moved to the far corner, the faint smell of old wood and musty air filled his nose. The room felt colder now, almost as though it were holding its breath, waiting for Jake to discover more. As he carefully moved an old wooden cabinet aside, something shiny caught his eye. It was a key, rusted but unmistakable, with an intricate design etched into its surface. Jake picked it up, and his mind raced. Could this key unlock the vault? He turned it over in his hand, his fingers tracing the markings. Something told him this was no ordinary key. It had to be the one. Jake's curiosity was no longer a simple desire for answers. It had become an obsession. He had to find out what was hidden in the depths of the hotel, beneath the layers of time and neglect. Without a second thought, Jake made his way to the basement. The old stairs creaked under his weight, each step echoing through the empty halls. As he reached the bottom, the temperature dropped, and the air felt thick with mystery. The basement was filled with old furniture and crates, remnants of the hotel's past, but nothing compared to the sense of discovery that now hung in the air. At the far end of the room, hidden behind a rusted metal door, Jake could see the outline of a large wooden chest. He approached cautiously, his breath fogging in the cold air. His heart pounded in his chest, the anticipation almost unbearable. He reached for the key, his fingers trembling slightly. With a click, the lock released. Jake slowly opened the chest, revealing a collection of old documents, maps, and photographs, along with something far more unexpected, a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards. As he crouched down to open the compartment, a chill ran down his spine. Inside, there were stacks of cash, money that had been hidden away for decades. But that was not the most shocking part. Buried beneath the money, Jake found a collection of ancient artifacts, intricately carved and covered in dust. These artifacts, Jake realized, were priceless. They were unlike anything he had ever seen, and they hinted at a history far older than the hotel itself. The artifacts were clearly of immense value, but they were more than just valuable objects. They were the key to something even bigger, something that had been carefully guarded for generations. Jake took a deep breath, his mind racing. What had he stumbled upon? Why had these treasures been hidden here, beneath this abandoned hotel? And what did it all mean for him now? The answers were just out of reach, but one thing was certain. The discovery of these artifacts was only the beginning. Jake had uncovered a secret that would change everything he thought he knew about his life, and the mysteries that lay beneath the surface of the old hotel were only starting to unfold. Jake sat in the dim light of the basement, staring at the stack of ancient artifacts in his hands. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. His mind raced with questions. Why had these treasures been hidden here, in a hotel that seemed like it had been forgotten by time? And who had left them behind? The more Jake thought about it, the more he realized that these weren't just random objects. They were part of a bigger story, one that had been deliberately kept from the world. As he carefully examined each artifact, Jake felt a strange connection to them. They were beautiful, yes, but there was something else, an energy, a history embedded in them that seemed to speak to him. But what could it mean? The chest was heavy with secrets, and now it was up to Jake to unlock them. He knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed help. He decided to reach out to someone who might understand the significance of what he had found. A few days later, Jake found himself standing outside the local library, the cool autumn breeze brushing against his jacket. He had spoken to Mrs. Carlisle, the town historian, on the phone. The day before, she had agreed to meet him and take a look at the artifacts. As Jake entered the library, he was greeted by the scent of old books and the faint rustle of pages being turned. Mrs. Carlisle, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, looked up from her desk. She was an expert on Pine Ridge's history and had spent her life uncovering the town's forgotten past. When Jake showed her the artifacts, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Where did you find these?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Jake explained how he had stumbled upon them in the hidden room of the old hotel. Mrs. Carlisle listened intently, her expression unreadable. After a moment, she stood up, her fingers brushing the artifacts as she examined them closely. "These aren't just relics of a bygone era," she said softly. "These are pieces of history, pieces that could change everything we know about this town." Mrs. Carlisle's words sent a shiver down Jake's spine. She explained that the artifacts were linked to a secret society that had existed in Pine Ridge over 100 years ago. The society had been involved in numerous strange and mysterious activities, many of which were erased from the town's official records. According to Mrs. Carlisle, the society had discovered something hidden beneath Pine Ridge, something powerful, and they had spent years protecting it from outsiders. Jake listened, stunned. The pieces were starting to come together. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into, but he felt a deep sense of responsibility. The hotel, the artifacts, the hidden vault, everything was connected. And now he was part of that story. Mrs. Carlisle took a deep breath and sat back down. "You must be careful," she warned. "This town's past is darker than anyone realizes. And there are people, dangerous people, who would do anything to get their hands on what you've uncovered." Her words were heavy, and Jake could feel the weight of them. He had to protect the secrets he had found. But who could he trust? That night, Jake returned to the hotel, his mind racing. He needed to find the vault that the blueprints had led him to. He knew that whatever was hidden down there could change his life forever. But there was something else. He had the sense that someone was watching him. As he entered the hotel, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He felt the cold air bite at his skin, and the silence of the place was deafening. The further he walked into the hotel, the more isolated he felt. It was as if the walls themselves were closing in on him. He quickly descended to the basement, determined to find the vault before anyone else could. But as he approached the door that led to the hidden chamber, he heard a faint sound behind him. Footsteps, slow and deliberate. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He spun around, but the basement was empty. His breath came in shallow bursts, and he felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. It was then that he realized he wasn't alone. There were others who had been watching him from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to make their move. And Jake knew that moment was fast approaching. He had to act quickly. With the key in hand, Jake stepped forward and unlocked the door. The air that rushed out from the hidden room was cold and musty, filled with the scent of damp earth and old secrets. As he stepped inside, Jake was met with a sight that took his breath away. There, buried beneath the dust and decay, was a vault, massive and ancient, its surface etched with strange symbols. This was it, the heart of the mystery. Jake didn't know what he would find inside, but one thing was certain. The secrets of Pine Ridge were waiting to be uncovered, and they would change everything. Jake took a deep breath as he stood before the massive vault. The cold, damp air from the hidden room seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for him to make the next move. His heart was pounding in his chest, a mixture of excitement and fear flooding his veins. He had uncovered so many secrets in this place, and yet, this vault, this final door, was the key to everything. The strange symbols etched into the metal surface only heightened his sense of unease. It was clear that whatever was inside was meant to remain hidden, and the weight of that secret was heavy. He reached for the large, ornate key that he had discovered in the hidden chamber earlier. His hand trembled slightly as he inserted it into the lock, the ancient metal protesting. With a low, eerie creak, with a sharp turn, the vault's door slowly began to open, revealing a dark, narrow space beyond. Jake stepped inside, the air growing colder with each step. His flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a room that seemed frozen in time. The walls were lined with shelves, each one filled with more boxes, old books, and papers. But it wasn't the objects that caught his eye. It was the centerpiece of the room. In the middle, resting on a large pedestal, was a small, intricately carved wooden box. The box seemed out of place amidst the dust and decay, its craftsmanship too perfect, too deliberate. As Jake approached it, he felt a strange pull, as if the box was calling to him. His fingers brushed against its smooth surface, and he hesitated. Was this the moment? Was this what he had been searching for? The box felt impossibly light as he lifted it, and the moment it was in his hands, a faint humming sound filled the room. It was subtle at first, but it grew louder, almost as if the box itself was alive, vibrating with energy. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He quickly placed the box on the table in front of him and tried to steady his breathing. With shaking hands, he opened it. Inside, there was no treasure, no piles of gold or jewels as he had half expected. Instead, there was something far more valuable, a single, ancient scroll, carefully sealed with a wax emblem. The wax was cracked, and the parchment inside looked fragile, as though it had been waiting for centuries to be discovered. Jake slowly unfurled the scroll, revealing intricate symbols and text that he couldn't understand. The language was foreign, but the symbols, they seemed familiar. It was as if they were speaking to him, unlocking something deep within his mind. For a moment, he couldn't tear his eyes away. Then, suddenly, the pieces started to fall into place. The strange symbols he had seen earlier, the hidden vault, the artifacts, all of it was connected to this scroll. This wasn't just a map or a set of directions. It was a blueprint, a guide to something much larger than he could have imagined. Jake's mind raced. What had he uncovered? The scroll was the key, but to what? As he studied the scroll further, he noticed a name written at the bottom, one that seemed oddly familiar, Larkstone. It was the same name that had appeared in the blueprints he had found earlier. Larkstone wasn't just a name. It was a place, a hidden location buried beneath Pine Ridge. Jake's heart began to race again. He had been given the key to a secret that had been hidden for generations. But what was it? What was hidden in Larkstone? And why had it been kept a secret for so long? The scroll seemed to promise answers, but Jake knew he couldn't unlock them alone. He needed help. He had to find someone who could read these symbols, someone who could help him uncover the true meaning behind the scroll. But as he turned to leave the vault, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. A noise, a soft scuffling sound, echoed through the dark room. Jake's instincts kicked in. Someone else was here. Someone had been watching him, waiting for him to uncover the secret. The realization hit him hard. He wasn't the only one searching for answers. There were others who would stop at nothing to get their hands on the scroll and whatever lay beneath Pine Ridge. Jake quickly shoved the scroll into his jacket and rushed toward the exit, his mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. He needed to get out of the hotel, but he also needed to find out more about Larkstone, and he needed to do it fast. He knew he couldn't trust anyone, at least, not yet. As he exited the hotel, Jake felt the weight of the scroll against his chest, its ancient secrets pressing against his heart. He had uncovered a mystery that would change everything, but now, he had to figure out how to stay one step ahead of those who would stop at nothing to claim it for themselves. Jake's breath quickened as he stepped out into the cool night air, the weight of the scroll heavy in his pocket. His heart still pounded from the sudden realization that someone was watching him, but now, there was no time to waste. He had to find answers, and he had to find them quickly. The scroll had been the key, but now he had to decipher its meaning, and he couldn't do it alone. He had no idea who else might be after the same secrets, but he knew. There were people out there who would stop at nothing to get their hands on it. As Jake made his way toward his truck, the street lamps cast long shadows on the empty road. The town of Pine Ridge, so quiet and serene during the day, now felt different, almost sinister, as though it were hiding something just beneath the surface. The earlier peace he'd felt when he first arrived seemed like a distant memory. The discovery of the vault had changed everything. As he slid into his truck, Jake's thoughts turned to Mrs. Carlisle. She had seemed to know something about the town's history, about the secrets buried here. But would she help him? Or had he already become a part of something far more dangerous than he had ever imagined? He pulled out his phone and dialed her number, praying she would pick up. "Mrs. Carlisle?" Jake said when she answered. "It's Jake Mitchell. We need to talk. I've found something, and I think it's connected to Larkstone." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. Then she spoke, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "Meet me at the library, Jake. I'll be there in 30 minutes. The line clicked off, and Jake tossed his phone onto the passenger seat. He started the truck and drove through the empty streets of Pine Ridge, his mind racing. Mrs. Carlisle had been the town's historian for years. If anyone knew the truth behind the mysterious scroll and the hidden vault, it was her. But what had she meant when she said that the town's past was darker than anyone realized? Jake's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he drove. The library wasn't far from the hotel, and soon enough, he was pulling up to the small, weathered building. The lights inside were dim, casting shadows against the walls. He parked and quickly got out of the truck, glancing around to make sure no one was watching him. As he entered the library, the musty scent of old books filled the air, and he felt the familiar weight of history pressing in on him. Mrs. Carlisle was waiting by a table in the corner, a stack of books and papers spread out in front of her. She looked up when Jake approached, her sharp eyes studying him closely. "You found something," she said, her voice low. Jake nodded, sitting across from her and pulling the scroll from his jacket. He unrolled it carefully, placing it on the table between them. This, Jake began, was hidden in the vault beneath the hotel. And I think it's connected to Larkstone. The blueprints, the artifacts, they all seem to point to something deeper. Mrs. Carlisle's expression grew more serious as she examined the scroll. Her fingers traced the symbols, and Jake noticed a flicker of recognition in her eyes. Larkstone, she murmured. It's more than just a place. It's a legacy, one that was meant to stay hidden. Jake leaned forward, eager for answers. What do you mean? What's so important about Larkstone? Mrs. Carlisle sighed, her fingers tapping on the edge of the table. Larkstone is not just a location, it's a secret. It's been guarded for centuries. The society that hid it believed it was protecting something powerful, something that could change the world. But over the years, the truth has been buried. The artifacts you found, the vault, it's all part of a larger plan, one that was set in motion long before any of us were born. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of plan? A plan to preserve knowledge, she replied, her voice almost a whisper. A knowledge that could shift the balance of power. The society that hid it believed that if the wrong people ever got their hands on it, the consequences would be catastrophic. Jake swallowed hard. And now, it seems like the wrong people are already after it. Mrs. Carlisle nodded gravely. Yes, there are others who know about Larkstone. Others who would stop at nothing to get what's hidden there. And if you've uncovered this scroll, Jake, you're already a part of it. You've become a target. Jake's heart raced. He had been hoping for answers, but now he realized he might have just opened a door he wasn't ready to walk through. The scroll wasn't just a key to a hidden vault. It was the first step in something much larger, something that could change everything. And now, he had no choice but to follow the trail. He looked at Mrs. Carlisle, determination in his eyes. What do we do next? We move quickly, she replied. We need to get to Larkstone before they do. We can't let this knowledge fall into the wrong hands. Jake stood up, the weight of the task ahead settling on his shoulders. He had no idea what lay ahead, but he knew one thing for certain. The secret of Larkstone was far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. And the deeper he went, the more he realized that there was no turning back. Jake and Mrs. Carlisle sat in the quiet library, the only sound being the rustle of papers as they examined the scroll once more. The weight of what they were about to undertake hung heavy in the air, a feeling that gnawed at Jake's gut. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, they were not alone in this. Someone, or something, had been watching Jake from the shadows ever since he first discovered the hidden vault beneath the hotel. He had unknowingly opened a door to a secret that others would kill to possess, and now he had to act fast. Mrs. Carlisle studied the symbols on the scroll, her face furrowed in concentration. This is what the society was trying to protect, she said softly. Larkstone was never just a place. It was a code, a key to something much bigger. The knowledge that was stored there could shift the balance of power. If it falls into the wrong hands, everything changes. Jake's mind raced. He had known from the start that this wasn't just about an abandoned hotel or forgotten artifacts. It was about something far more dangerous. But who else was involved? Who else knew about Larkstone? And why hadn't anyone come forward with this information before? We need to get to Larkstone, Jake said, the urgency in his voice sharp. Before they do. Mrs. Carlisle nodded. You're right. We don't have much time. The society, those who hid this secret, they left markers along the way. Clues hidden in plain sight, meant to guide the right person to Larkstone. But others, dangerous people, have been searching for it too. If they find it before us, we'll lose everything. The air seemed to thicken as Jake processed her words. This wasn't just a race against time. It was a race against people who would stop at nothing to claim Larkstone's secrets for themselves. Do you know where to start? Jake asked. I think I do, Mrs. Carlisle replied, standing up and walking toward the back of the library, where a large map of the area hung on the wall. She pulled it down and traced a line with her finger. Larkstone is not marked on any modern map, she continued. But there are ancient records, stories passed down through the generations. From what I've studied, Larkstone is located in the mountains to the west of Pine Ridge. There's a cave system, one that leads deep underground. That's where the society kept its greatest secrets. Jake felt a cold shiver run through him. A cave system, deep underground. It sounded like something out of a legend. But if Mrs. Carlisle was right, this cave held the answers, and they needed to get there before someone else did. How do we get there? Jake asked, determination setting in. We'll have to take the old trail, Mrs. Carlisle said, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. It's treacherous, and few people know it exists. But it's the only way to reach the caves undetected. The trail was used by the society to keep the location of Larkstone secret. They made sure only those they trusted knew the path. Jake nodded. There was no turning back now. They had to move fast. Mrs. Carlisle grabbed her bag and a few supplies, and together, they left the library and headed toward the outskirts of town. As they walked, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. Every rustle of leaves, every passing shadow, seemed to make his pulse quicken. He knew they weren't alone. They had been watched before, and now, whoever was after the secrets of Larkstone was getting closer. The old trail was hidden in the woods, just outside the town limits. The thick trees and dense underbrush made it nearly impossible to spot, but Mrs. Carlisle seemed to know exactly where to go. They made their way through the forest, careful to stay off the main roads. The further they went, the more Jake felt the weight of the journey settle on his shoulders. The mountains loomed ahead, their jagged peaks shrouded in mist. The cave system was somewhere in those mountains, somewhere beneath the earth, waiting to reveal its secrets. As they neared the base of the mountain, Mrs. Carlisle paused and turned to Jake. This is where the trail ends, she said. We'll have to go on foot from here. The cave entrance is hidden in the rocks, and it's easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking for. Jake felt a sense of unease settle in his stomach. They were so close, and yet, something told him that danger was just around the corner. He glanced around, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. Do you think we're being followed? He asked, his voice low. Mrs. Carlisle didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn map. She studied it for a moment before nodding. It's possible. We can't afford to make any mistakes. With that, they continued up the mountain, their footsteps muffled by the soft dirt and fallen leaves. The air grew colder as they climbed, and the once familiar sounds of the forest seemed to fade into an eerie silence. Jake's thoughts raced. They were close to uncovering the truth, but what would they find when they reached Larkstone? And who would they have to face to protect it? The climb up the mountain was more treacherous than Jake had expected. The path, hidden beneath thick underbrush and jagged rocks, was barely a trail at all. It twisted and turned, leading them deeper into the wilderness, with each step taking them farther from the familiar world of Pine Ridge. The cool mountain air was thick with the scent of pine, and the only sounds were the crunch of their boots against the earth and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Mrs. Carlisle led the way, her steps sure and steady, as if she had walked this path 100 times before. Jake followed closely behind, his eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The weight of the scroll in his jacket seemed to grow heavier with each step. It was as though the secrets within it were pulling him forward, urging him to uncover the truth hidden deep within the mountains. But with every passing moment, the sense of danger grew stronger. After what felt like hours of climbing, they reached a clearing. The trees parted, revealing a large rock formation at the base of the mountain. The rocks were covered in moss and lichen, and the ground was uneven and rough. Mrs. Carlisle stopped at the edge of the clearing and turned to Jake. This is it, she said, her voice low. The entrance to the caves is hidden behind these rocks. But we have to be careful. There are traps, old ones, placed by the society to keep the unworthy from finding the truth. Jake's heart raced as he looked at the rocks. They seemed ordinary enough, but something about them felt out of place, as if they were guarding something far more important than just a hidden cave. Mrs. Carlisle knelt down and began to search the ground, her fingers moving expertly over the rocks. Jake watched her, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. They were so close now. He could feel it in his bones. Finally, Mrs. Carlisle's hand stopped on a large stone, one that was slightly raised from the ground. She pressed it down, and with a soft rumble, the ground beneath them shifted. A section of the rock wall slid open, revealing a narrow passageway. This is it, Mrs. Carlisle said, standing up. Larkstone is inside. Jake stepped forward, his pulse quickening. He could hear the distant sound of rushing water echoing from deep within the cave. He glanced at Mrs. Carlisle, who gave him a reassuring nod. "Let's go," she said. Together, they stepped into the dark passageway, the entrance closing behind them with a quiet thud. The air inside was cool and damp, and the only light came from the faint glow of their flashlights. The walls of the cave were uneven, jagged, and covered in ancient symbols, just like the ones on the scroll. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he realized they were not just symbols. They were a language, a key to unlocking the mystery of Larkstone. As they moved deeper into the cave, the passageway narrowed, and the air grew colder. The sound of rushing water grew louder, and Jake could feel the ground beneath his feet growing softer, as though it were absorbing the weight of their footsteps. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached a large underground chamber. The floor was smooth, and in the center of the room stood an ancient stone pedestal. The pedestal was covered in dust, but something about it felt sacred, as though it had been untouched for centuries. Mrs. Carlisle walked toward it, her hand outstretched. "This is it," she said softly. "Larkstone." Jake stood back, his heart pounding. This was the moment they had been searching for. The secret of Larkstone was just within reach. Mrs. Carlisle carefully moved aside the dust on the pedestal, revealing a large stone slab beneath it. The slab was etched with more of the same symbols they had seen throughout the cave. She traced the symbols with her fingers, and with a soft groan, the slab shifted. Beneath it, there was a compartment, an ancient chest, its surface covered in years of grime and dust. Mrs. Carlisle hesitated for a moment, then slowly opened the chest. Inside, the dim light of their flashlights revealed rows of ancient scrolls, bound in leather. These were the true secrets of Larkstone, the knowledge that had been hidden away for centuries. Jake stepped forward, his hands trembling as he reached for one of the scrolls. But before he could touch it, a sharp noise echoed through the cave, the sound of footsteps approaching quickly. Jake's heart skipped a beat. They weren't alone anymore. He spun around, his eyes scanning the shadows of the cave. Figures were emerging from the darkness, their forms barely visible in the dim light. They had been waiting for them, lurking in the shadows, ready to claim the secrets of Larkstone for themselves. Mrs. Carlisle's expression hardened. "We have to leave, now," she whispered urgently. But it was too late. The figures stepped into the light, revealing their faces. They were men, rough, dangerous, and armed. Jake's blood ran cold. These were the people he had feared, the ones who would stop at nothing to get their hands on the power hidden in Larkstone. And now, they had found it. Jake's heart was racing as the figures stepped forward, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous chamber. His mind raced, calculating the distance to the exit, wondering how many of them there were, and whether there was any chance of escape. He glanced at Mrs. Carlisle, whose expression was grim but determined. She didn't flinch, didn't move, as though she had expected this moment. The men, rough and dangerous looking, were closing in fast. They weren't just here to find answers. They were here to take what they wanted, and they wouldn't leave without it. Jake felt the weight of the scroll in his jacket. He had no idea what the scroll held, but he knew it was more than just a relic. This was power, and these men wanted it. Mrs. Carlisle, sensing Jake's tension, whispered urgently, "We have to act fast. They won't hesitate." Jake nodded, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife he carried at his side. But it wasn't just the threat of violence that made him nervous. It was the cold, calculating look in the eyes of the men before him. They weren't just here for money or treasure. They were here to control something far more dangerous. One of the men stepped forward, his eyes glinting in the dim light of the cave. "You found what you shouldn't have," he said, his voice low and threatening. "And now you're going to give it to us." Jake stood his ground, the tension between them palpable. Mrs. Carlisle didn't speak, but her hand moved subtly, like a signal. Jake knew what she was thinking. They couldn't let these men get their hands on the scroll. It was too important. Jake shifted slightly, his gaze flicking toward the shadows behind the men. There was a narrow path leading deeper into the cave, and if they could make it past the men, there was a chance to escape. But that meant getting to the scroll first. In one swift motion, Jake reached into his jacket and pulled the scroll out, holding it firmly in his hands. "This is not yours," Jake said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. The man who had spoken stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Hand it over." and maybe we'll let you walk out of here alive. Jake's grip tightened on the scroll. He had no intention of giving it up. The truth of what lay hidden in Larkstone was too important to fall into the wrong hands. The man advanced, but before he could reach Jake, a sharp noise cut through the air, louder than any of them had expected. It was a faint sound at first, but it quickly grew louder, a strange rumble that seemed to come from deep within the earth. The men froze, their eyes darting around in confusion. "What is that?" one of them muttered, looking at the walls. "I don't know," another man replied, his voice tense. The ground beneath them seemed to tremble, the vibrations growing stronger. For a moment, Jake thought it was his mind playing tricks on him, but then he realized it wasn't just the ground shaking. The entire cave was shifting. The walls groaned. The ceiling creaked, and the floor beneath them seemed to buckle. Without warning, a loud crack echoed through the chamber, followed by the sound of stone breaking. The men who had been closing in on Jake staggered backward, panic rising in their faces. The entrance to the cave, the path they had used to get in, was starting to collapse. The men began to shout, scrambling to find an escape route. "We need to get out," one of them yelled, his voice full of terror. The cave's collapsing. But Jake wasn't looking at the men. He was looking at Mrs. Carlisle, who had already started moving toward the back of the cave. Without a word, she gestured for Jake to follow her. Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed the scroll and made a run for it, dodging falling debris and scrambling to stay ahead of the men. The rumble of the collapsing cave was deafening, and the walls seemed to close in around him with every step. He didn't know how much time they had before the entire cave came crashing down, but he knew they had to move fast. Mrs. Carlisle led the way, her movements sure and purposeful. She was already ahead of him, her eyes scanning the path ahead. The men were still behind them, but they were disorganized now, too focused on trying to escape the cave's collapse to focus on the scroll. Jake pushed himself harder, his legs burning as he ran. The air was thick with dust and the sound of rocks crashing down. The passageways were narrowing, but Mrs. Carlisle seemed to know exactly where to go. They rounded a sharp corner, and for the first time, Jake could see a sliver of light ahead, an exit. They were almost there. But just as they neared the exit, one of the men lunged at Jake, grabbing him by the shoulder and yanking him back. Jake stumbled, but he managed to keep his footing, spinning around to face the man. The man's face was wild with panic, his eyes wide with fear. "You don't understand," the man yelled. "You can't take it. We need it." Jake didn't have time to argue. He swung his elbow back, striking the man in the chest, and broke free. Without looking back, he sprinted toward the exit, Mrs. Carlisle ahead of him. They burst out into the open air, the daylight blinding after the dark of the cave. They didn't stop running until they reached the safety of the trees, far from the collapsing cave and the chaos within. Jake's breath came in ragged gasps, his heart still racing from the close call. Mrs. Carlisle slowed her pace, looking at him with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "That was too close," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Jake nodded, his hand still clutching the scroll. "We have it," he said, looking at the piece of paper that had brought them this far. "But now we have to figure out what it all means." Jake and Mrs. Carlisle sat in the shadow of the trees, their breaths coming in heavy, ragged gasps after their narrow escape from the collapsing cave. The daylight was blinding after the darkness of the cave, and the cool mountain air felt refreshing against their sweaty skin. Jake was still clutching the scroll tightly, as if letting go of it would somehow erase everything they had uncovered. The rush of adrenaline was starting to fade, but a new feeling was settling in, one of dread. They had made it out, but they were far from safe. The men who had tried to take the scroll weren't going to give up that easily. And now, Jake had something they wanted more than anything else. Mrs. Carlisle was the first to break the silence. "We need to keep moving," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. "They'll be coming after us. We can't risk staying here." Jake nodded, his mind racing. "Where do we go?" Mrs. Carlisle stood up and dusted herself off, her eyes scanning the area around them. "There's an old cabin a few miles from here," she said. "It's isolated, and no one's been there in years. We can lay low for a while, figure out our next move." Jake glanced at the scroll in his hands. They had uncovered something more than a lost treasure. The secrets of Larkstone were far greater than anything he had imagined, and now, they were in danger of being lost forever. We can't let them get it, he muttered, more to himself than to Mrs. Carlisle. We have to make sure this stays hidden. Mrs. Carlisle looked at him with a sharp, knowing gaze. That's why we're going to the cabin. We need to keep the scroll safe. And we need to figure out what it means. They began walking again, the distant sound of rushing water growing fainter as they moved further into the woods. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the path ahead. The air had a cool bite to it now, a reminder of how quickly the weather could change in the mountains. They walked in silence, the weight of the scroll between them like a silent, pressing force. Jake's mind kept returning to the cave, to the moment when the men had cornered them, to the rumbling of the earth as it seemed to shift beneath their feet. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, that the ground they had uncovered was shaking loose something far larger than they could understand. After a few miles, they reached the cabin. It was small and weathered, tucked into the trees as if it had been forgotten by time. The door creaked as they pushed it open, the smell of dust and old wood filling the air. Mrs. Carlisle moved quickly, checking the windows and locking the door behind them. Jake placed the scroll on the wooden table in the center of the room, his eyes never leaving it. He knew the answers were hidden there, but they were in a language he couldn't understand. What now? Jake asked. Mrs. Carlisle opened her bag and pulled out a tattered book. I've seen these symbols before, she said, flipping through the pages. They're part of an ancient script, one that was used by the society to encode their knowledge. It's a code, and it will take time to break it. Jake ran a hand through his hair, frustration rising in him. How long? It could take days, Mrs. Carlisle said, her eyes scanning the page. Maybe longer. These kinds of codes are complex. But if we can crack it, we'll have the answers we need. Jake's gaze shifted to the window. The shadows outside seemed to be growing longer, the night creeping closer. They couldn't stay here forever. The men would be looking for them, and they couldn't afford to wait too long. What if they come for us before you can break the code? Jake asked, his voice low. Then we'll have to protect it, Mrs. Carlisle replied. We'll do whatever it takes. They both knew that there was no easy way out of this. The scroll had opened a door to a dangerous secret, and now they had to face the consequences of uncovering it. The power that lay hidden in Larkstone was too great, too dangerous to fall into the wrong hands. And Jake knew that the longer they stayed here, the more likely it was that the wrong people would find them. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the room. Mrs. Carlisle continued to flip through the book, muttering to herself as she worked to decipher the symbols. Jake could only watch, his thoughts spinning. They had come so far, but it felt like the real challenge was just beginning. They weren't safe yet. The men who had pursued them, the ones who had already tried to take the scroll, were still out there. And Jake couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still to come. The power that Larkstone represented wasn't just a secret, it was a threat. And he wasn't sure how much longer they could keep it from the world. Jake couldn't shake the feeling of unease as he sat across from Mrs. Carlisle, who was still engrossed in her work, slowly piecing together the ancient symbols on the scroll. The dim light from the fire flickered across the pages, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch further into the room with each passing moment. The longer they stayed in the cabin, the more Jake felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They were hiding in the wilderness, with only the faint glow of a dying fire and the rustle of wind in the trees for company. The scroll was safe, for now, but how long would that last? The men who had chased them down in the cave wouldn't stop. They knew too much, and now they were closer than ever. Mrs. Carlisle finally paused in her work and looked up, her face serious. I've translated part of it, she said, her voice steady. But there's still a lot more to go. The code is complex, and the symbols are part of a cipher that only those with a deep understanding of the society's methods could decode. We're dealing with more than just words. We're dealing with a history that was hidden for a reason. Jake leaned forward, his impatience growing. What have you found so far? Mrs. Carlisle nodded and spread the scroll across the table. This is what I've translated so far, she said, pointing to a section of the scroll. It describes the origin of the society that hid the secrets of Larkstone. They were a group of scholars, philosophers, and historians who believed that the knowledge they guarded was too dangerous to be shared with the world. They buried it beneath the earth, hidden in the caves of this very mountain. Jake's mind raced as he processed the information. He had always suspected that there was more to Larkstone than just a hidden treasure, but this was something else entirely. The knowledge beneath Pine Ridge wasn't just valuable. It was dangerous. What kind of knowledge? Jake asked, his voice tight with concern. Mrs. Carlisle hesitated, her eyes scanning the scroll. They didn't just protect physical artifacts. They guarded ancient wisdom, knowledge that could change the world. Some of it was about technology, others about philosophy, and some about the natural world. They believed that the power contained in these teachings was too great for anyone to control. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had known from the moment he found the scroll that it was important, but he hadn't realized how important. This was more than just a hidden vault. It was a weapon, one that could tip the balance of power in the world. So what does it say about Larkstone? Jake asked. Mrs. Carlisle's eyes darkened as she continued reading. Larkstone is the key, she said softly. It's the place where the most dangerous secrets were hidden. The society used the caves to house their knowledge, but they also created a failsafe. If someone ever uncovered Larkstone, the knowledge inside would be unlocked only by those who truly understood its value. Jake's stomach twisted as he thought about the implications. The scroll was a map, a guide, but only for those who could decipher it. They had uncovered the first pieces, but it wasn't enough. They needed to get deeper into the caves, to the heart of Larkstone. But who else was looking for it? We need to go, Jake said, standing up abruptly. The longer we stay here, the more dangerous it gets. We need to find the rest of the secrets before they do. Mrs. Carlisle nodded, closing the scroll and carefully rolling it up. I agree, she said. But we can't rush. The path ahead is dangerous. And if we're not careful, we'll end up just like the society's enemies. Lost, consumed by the power of what they uncovered. Jake's mind was already racing ahead, imagining the next steps. They had to move fast. The knowledge of Larkstone was not just hidden. It was waiting, hidden beneath layers of history, buried in the mountains, protected by those who had feared its power. But Jake couldn't wait. He had come too far to stop now. They had to unlock the final secrets before someone else did. Mrs. Carlisle stood up, her face set with determination. We'll leave at dawn, she said. The cave system is dangerous, but it's our only path forward. If we want to uncover what's really hidden in Larkstone, we have to go deeper. Jake nodded, his jaw set. He wasn't afraid of the dangers that lay ahead. He had come this far, and he wasn't going to stop now. But as they made their preparations for the journey ahead, a creeping sense of dread settled over him. They weren't just walking into the unknown, they were walking into a trap, and the men who had been chasing them were closer than ever. Jake woke up before dawn, the cabin eerily quiet except for the soft crackling of the dying fire. The world outside was still covered in a blanket of fog, the trees barely visible in the early morning light. He had barely slept, his mind racing with the looming danger and the unknowns ahead. He could feel the weight of the scroll against his chest, a constant reminder of what they were carrying, something that could change everything. Mrs. Carlisle was already up, sitting by the window, looking out at the mist rolling across the mountains. She turned when Jake entered the room, her face still grim but determined. We leave soon, she said quietly. Jake nodded, his heart still heavy with the sense of urgency that had built up since they escaped the cave. They weren't safe here, and they both knew it. The men who had chased them down had to be getting closer. The time for hiding was over. It was time to uncover the rest of the secrets. Jake grabbed his gear and prepared to leave. They would head deeper into the mountains today, into the heart of Larkstone. The thought of the ancient caves and whatever lay hidden inside both thrilled and terrified him. The scroll held the answers, but it was just the beginning. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that every step they took would lead them into more danger. They set off toward the mountains, the path winding through the dense forest. The air was cool, but the weight of the scroll felt heavier with each passing hour. Mrs. Carlisle led the way, her steps sure and steady as they moved deeper into the wilderness. Jake followed closely behind, trying to keep his mind focused. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees towering high above, their branches intertwined like the threads of a long-forgotten story. The sound of birds and the rustling of leaves were the only noises breaking the stillness, but even that felt like it was hiding something, as if the very air held its breath, waiting. After several hours of walking, they reached the base of the mountain. The rock was jagged and steep, and the path became harder to follow. The trees thinned, and the rocky terrain began to rise. Jake's legs were already sore, but the urgency of the situation pushed him forward. They couldn't stop now. As they climbed higher, the sky began to darken, the clouds thickening overhead. The wind picked up, a cold gust that cut through the trees. It felt like nature itself was warning them, telling them to turn back. But Jake couldn't. He had come too far. They were too close. The entrance to the caves had to be somewhere ahead, hidden in the mountainside. Mrs. Carlisle paused at the foot of a particularly steep incline, her eyes scanning the rocks. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're close now. The entrance is hidden behind these rocks, but we have to be careful. There are traps. The society used them to keep the unworthy out." Jake nodded, his pulse quickening. He could feel it now. This was the moment. Everything they had uncovered so far had led them here, to this hidden entrance, to the heart of the mystery. Mrs. Carlisle moved forward, carefully examining the rocks. She found a narrow opening hidden behind a cluster of jagged stones, just big enough for them to squeeze through. "Follow me," she said, her voice steady. Jake followed her into the darkness, the air inside cool and damp. They moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The further they went, the more Jake felt the weight of the place pressing down on him. The cave seemed to go on forever, the walls smooth and polished in some places, rough and jagged in others. Strange symbols were etched into the stone, similar to those on the scroll. It felt like they were walking through history, as if the walls themselves were telling a story. After what felt like hours, they reached a large chamber. The room was vast, the ceiling lost in the shadows above them. In the center of the room was a pedestal, carved from stone, standing like a monument to something forgotten. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he looked around. This was it, the heart of Larkstone. The secrets they had been searching for were here, waiting to be uncovered. But as they stepped forward, Jake felt a shift in the air, a subtle change, like the earth itself was shifting. Mrs. Carlisle stopped, her eyes narrowing as she glanced around the chamber. "We're not alone," she said, her voice tense. Jake's heart skipped a beat. He had expected danger, but he hadn't expected it to come so quickly. He reached for the knife at his side, his mind racing. "How many?" he whispered. Mrs. Carlisle didn't answer. Instead, she moved toward the pedestal, her eyes scanning the chamber. Jake followed her, every muscle in his body tense, ready for anything. As they reached the pedestal, a sound echoed through the cave, footsteps, slow and deliberate. Jake turned, his hand gripping the knife tighter. Shadows moved in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. They weren't alone, and whoever was coming didn't want them to uncover the truth. Jake's heart raced as the shadows grew closer, moving with purpose through the vast, dark chamber. He could hear the faint sound of footsteps echoing off the stone walls, each step growing louder. The air around him grew thick with tension, the very atmosphere pressing down on him. Mrs. Carlisle had already positioned herself behind the pedestal, her eyes scanning the room, her hand on the dagger hidden at her waist. Jake could sense the danger, but his instincts told him to stay calm. He glanced at the pedestal again, noting the ancient symbols etched deeply into the stone. This was no ordinary relic. Whatever secrets were hidden here, they were worth protecting at all costs. The footsteps came closer, and Jake instinctively gripped the hilt of his knife. He knew they couldn't just stand there and wait for their pursuers to strike. Whoever was approaching knew they were close to the heart of Larkstone, and they wouldn't let anyone get in their way. Mrs. Carlisle's voice was barely a whisper, but it was firm. "Stay quiet. Let them come to us. We'll deal with them when the time is right." Jake nodded, but his gaze never left the shadows. He could make out faint figures now, moving through the darkness, their shapes growing more distinct with each passing second. The tension in the room was unbearable. Every inch of his body was on high alert, but he held his ground. The figures were just ahead now, and Jake could make out their outlines. 3 men, their movements coordinated, and their eyes fixed on the pedestal. They had come for the same thing they were after, Larkstone's secrets. "You shouldn't have come here," one of the men said, his voice low and threatening. He stepped forward, his eyes locked on Jake and Mrs. Carlisle. "You're not ready for what's inside." Jake didn't flinch, his grip tightening on the knife in his hand. "We'll see about that," he muttered, his voice steady. The man smirked, but his eyes were filled with malice. You've stumbled into something you can't control. You'll regret this. With that, the three men advanced, but Jake and Mrs. Carlisle were ready. Mrs. Carlisle struck first, her movements swift and precise, a blur of motion as she moved behind one of the men, using her knowledge of the caves to her advantage. The man didn't even have time to react before she had him pinned, his knife falling to the ground with a clatter. The other two men hesitated for just a moment, but it was all the opening Jake needed. He lunged forward, his knife flashing in the dim light as he slashed at the closest man's arm. The man grunted in pain and backed away, but Jake wasn't done. He pressed forward, his focus sharper than ever. With a quick strike, he incapacitated the man, leaving him stumbling backward in shock. The last man, realizing that his comrades had been taken down, turned and bolted toward the exit. But he wasn't quick enough. Mrs. Carlisle had already moved to intercept him, her movements like lightning. She blocked his path, her dagger raised. "You won't be leaving with it," she said, her voice calm and resolute. The man froze, his face a mixture of fear and defiance. He knew he had been beaten, but he wasn't ready to surrender. "You think you've won?" He spat, his chest heaving with anger. "You don't understand. The truth inside Larkstone will destroy you all. You don't know what you're dealing with." Jake stepped forward, his voice steady. "We'll find out. But you're not stopping us." The man's eyes flicked between Jake and Mrs. Carlisle, and for a moment, he seemed to consider his options. But then, with a low growl, he lunged toward Mrs. Carlisle, his fist raised. But before he could land the blow, Jake was there. He grabbed the man's arm, twisting it behind his back and forcing him to the ground. The man struggled, but Jake held firm. "We don't have time for this," Jake said, his voice cold. "Tell us what we need to know, and we'll let you go." The man glared at him, but it was clear he was beaten. "You'll never understand," he muttered. "You can't control what's inside. The power, it's not meant for anyone. The society hid it for a reason. And now you're going to destroy everything." "Enough," Jake said, tightening his grip. "You've lost. Now, tell us what we need to know." The man remained silent for a long moment, his face contorted with frustration. But then, with a sigh, he spoke. "Fine," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "Larkstone is a place of knowledge, yes, but it's also a place of power. The society believed that if the wrong hands got hold of it, the world would be plunged into chaos. They buried the knowledge deep within the caves, away from prying eyes. But now it's too late. You've already awakened it. It won't be long before others come for you. You've set something in motion you can't stop." Jake's mind raced as the man's words sank in. They had awakened something far larger than they had imagined. The secrets of Larkstone were more dangerous than they had ever realized, and now, there was no turning back. As the man fell silent, Jake exchanged a look with Mrs. Carlisle. The threat was far from over. They hadn't just uncovered the secrets of Larkstone. They had unleashed a power that would change everything. Jake stared at the man, whose defiant glare was slowly fading as he lay on the cold stone floor of the cave. The man's words echoed in his mind. "You've set something in motion you can't stop." What had they awoken in Larkstone? And more importantly, what would come for them now? Jake exchanged a glance with Mrs. Carlisle, who was standing silently beside him, her face etched with concern. They had fought hard to get this far, but the battle wasn't over yet. Far from it. Mrs. Carlisle bent down, her fingers brushing the man's forehead, as if to read him. She stood up, her gaze firm. "He's right, you know," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years of study. "We've awoken something. The society, they never intended for anyone to control the knowledge here. Not even us." Jake's stomach twisted. He had always known there was more at stake than they had originally thought, but hearing it confirmed made his skin crawl. "Then what do we do now?" Jake asked. Mrs. Carlisle turned away from the man, who was now breathing heavily, his energy spent. "We need to leave," she said, walking toward the pedestal. "We can't stay here any longer. We've done enough damage already. The knowledge here is too powerful to be in the wrong hands, and if we don't protect it, it will be lost forever." The words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. They had spent all this time uncovering the secrets of Larkstone, but now it seemed as though their journey was more about protecting it than unveiling it. He watched as Mrs. Carlisle carefully placed the scroll back into its protective casing. She locked it with a small key she had found earlier, her hands trembling. "There's a deeper part of the cave, one that the society kept locked. It's where the most dangerous secrets are hidden, she explained quietly, her voice distant as if recalling a memory long buried. We need to keep it sealed, Jake. We're not meant to uncover everything. Jake stood there for a long moment, considering her words. He had hoped this journey would give him answers about his life, the war, the darkness that followed him. But the secrets of Larkstone were bigger than any one man. You mean we just leave it? Jake said, his voice thick with disbelief. What if someone else comes looking for it? Mrs. Carlisle met his gaze, her expression resolute. They will, she said simply. But that's why we have to make sure it stays hidden. The society did what they had to, and now it's our turn. We can't allow this knowledge to fall into the wrong hands. Not now. Jake's fingers tightened around the hilt of his knife, a flash of anger rising in his chest. He had thought that by uncovering the secrets of Larkstone, he could find purpose, maybe even redemption. But what was left for him now? What was the point if they were simply going to lock it away, never knowing what lay at the heart of it all? As if sensing his thoughts, Mrs. Carlisle turned back to him. I know it's hard, she said softly. But there are things in this world that aren't meant to be uncovered. We've seen what happens when people try to control power they don't understand. Jake's heart sank as he remembered the warning from the man, the ones who had attacked them in the caves. The power inside Larkstone wasn't just knowledge. It was a force that could change everything. And now, it was in their hands. What if we could do something with it? Jake asked quietly, his voice filled with uncertainty. What if we used it for good? Mrs. Carlisle shook her head. The society tried that, Jake. They tried for years to control it. And look where it got them. They failed. Now it's up to us to keep it hidden. There's a reason it was buried for centuries. Jake didn't say anything. The weight of her words settled heavily on his shoulders. He could feel the eyes of the men, the ones who had come after him, still watching from the shadows. They would never stop. But he was out of options. They had to leave. Without another word, Mrs. Carlisle started walking toward the exit, the scrolls safely tucked away. Jake followed, the cavern's cold walls closing in behind them. The journey was over. They had uncovered the heart of Larkstone, but it wasn't theirs to control. It was theirs to protect, to ensure that its secrets remained buried. The world wasn't ready for the power that lay beneath the mountain, and neither were they. As they made their way out of the cave and back into the daylight, Jake took one last look at the darkness behind him. The shadows of Larkstone would remain, locked away, waiting for the next person brave or foolish enough to search for its secrets. But for now, it was over. They had done what they could, and that was enough. Dive into this gripping adventure through powerful veteran stories as we follow Jake, a retired soldier, who stumbles upon the hidden secrets of Larkstone, an ancient place locked away with dangerous knowledge. From the moment Jake uncovers a mysterious scroll, the story unfolds, filled with danger, ancient artifacts, and the fight to protect what lies beneath the mountains. With each step, Jake faces adversaries who will stop at nothing to control the power of Larkstone, and the stakes grow higher as he and his ally, Mrs. Carlisle, uncover truths that could change the world forever. These veteran stories are not just about battle and survival, but about what happens when the past refuses to stay buried, forcing our hero to decide whether to protect or destroy the very knowledge that can reshape everything. In this thrilling narrative, the true weight of what Jake has uncovered becomes clear, the power to alter the future, but also the burden to keep it from those who would misuse it. As the story progresses, the fight against those who seek the knowledge intensifies, and Jake must confront the harsh reality of what it means to uncover secrets in a world not ready for them. These veteran stories reveal the internal struggle between doing what is right and what is necessary to survive, making each twist more compelling than the last. By the end of this journey, the question remains, can Jake keep the dangerous secrets of Larkstone safe, or will others with darker intentions claim them for themselves? This is not just a tale of one man's adventure, but a profound look at the consequences of seeking out forgotten truths, where each choice comes with its own set of risks. These veteran stories are filled with action, heart, and the ultimate question of whether one man can truly change the world by keeping dangerous knowledge locked away.